And it is our pleasure now to have John Crossman, the founder and owner of Crossman Career Builders, with us today to lead the discussion. Mr. Crossman is an icon of the real estate industry, and he is a nationally recognized executive, writer, speaker, and a strong voice of support for minority causes and a passionate advocate for student growth and success. Mr. Crossman is the former president of Crossman & Company, a leading real estate company headquartered in Orlando, Florida. He's also who originally came up with our FIR21, and he's been the spear leader for many years and is also a very treasured mentor of mine over the years. So please welcome Mr. John Crossman.
Thank you, Piper. Students, thank you so much for being on this call. And I want to give you just a real quick perspective, and then we'll get into introductions. A lot of times in life, we get in situations, and I try to sort of visualize what's the nature of the relationship. Like it's a student-teacher, or it's a parent-child, or boss and an employee. And with this panel, I really want you to see, Bridgid and Michael and Gregg as like an uncle or a big brother, or the coolest aunt you've ever had, as far as people that are resources to you. In that if you have a job interview in 2 weeks or 2 years, these are people that you could email and say, hey, I could use some advice, and they're gonna help you. All three of them are knowledgeable, and they're kind, and they're helpful. There will be other people that are involved in this panel that are more executive, purely executive types that really you might context differently. But with these three, they're very friendly, and they're going to be very good resources for today and moving forward. Okay, so today we're going to have a nice light conversation, and this is good warm up as far as we get into some other stuff down the road that might be a little bit more challenging. But today is just getting to know a few people and having some questions. Okay, so with that, I'm going to start introducing them. And Gregg, we're going to start with you, if that's okay. And Gregg, you went to FSU, you graduated a degree in economics, which is cool, and it's a little bit different from some of our students. You started out in real estate as an intern and worked your way up to now you are one of the most influential executives in the state of Florida and beyond, so very, very impressive. And I always like that you kind of have a really good insight, I think, for students as far as starting out in leasing and in property management and brokerage, good aspects there. So with that as just a setup, could you mind just telling us a little bit about you and what you're doing these days?
Yeah, thanks, John, and honored to be here. And for the students, time flies. It didn't seem that long ago that I was there, but it's 20 plus years ago now, and I have a little gray in my beard to show it. So yeah, as John mentioned, John and I actually worked together for a number of years. I was on a track at FSU I really wanted to go more kind of the law political route. And fortunately and unfortunately, I worked an internship my senior year at the mayor's office, and it was a great experience. But over that year, it kind of made me realize I didn't think I really wanted to go into politics. And every lawyer I met told me don't go into law, which wasn't the greatest recruiting vehicle. So I was fortunate to find out about an opportunity with a great iconic company, Trammell Crow Company, and I recognize the ages of most of the students. That company's not been around now for about 13 years, at least in what we know of it. They still are an active developer. But I had an opportunity to go take an internship there. I was a graduate. I think I had just enough wisdom to realize that even though it was an internship and even though I had graduated, that I'd be stupid not to give it a try. And I kind of bet on myself a little bit. So I moved to Orlando. I took the internship. It was focused on the industrial side of the business. I quickly got into the brokerage and leasing side of that business, and Trammell Crow Company was an active developer. So I got exposed to elements of the development business very early in my career, which I'm grateful for today. As I moved along, I got more into the leadership side, was overseeing our leasing and management group. And then in late 2006, what seemed like a terrible thing, our biggest competitor, it was announced, bought us, and that was CBRE. And the reality is a lot of us really weren't thrilled about that. Not that CB is a bad company at all; it's a great company, but it was just not where we probably wanted to be. And so that bad thing, and that's maybe a point to make here to the students, sometimes in life, those things that seem like a bad thing actually end up being a really good thing. And so we, a group of us shifted to a company based out of Orlando, C&L Financial Group. We started a new real estate business with 12 of us in 2007. We gutted through the downturn, and it was a great time to actually grow a company. And then in 2015, after a lot of growth, we led a managed buyout, which basically meant our partners bought our business away from C&L. It was a friendly deal. We relaunched a brand as Foundry Commercial, and today we're in 11 markets, Southeast and into Texas. We have about 350 associates, 85 brokers. We lease and manage 60 million square feet, and we are approaching $2 billion in development and investment activities. And I oversee the real estate services side of the business, which is brokerage, property management, leasing, and project management. So that's my basic story. And I live here in Orlando with a wife that was a Seminole and 2 kids, 10 and 13. And hopefully we'll get to a football game somehow this season.
That's awesome. You know, Gregg, one of the things I heard you say is like that internship really helped you. And so that even though it didn't work out, it helped you, you know, the political world's loss is our gain, right? So, but you would encourage the internship. And then the second thing I heard you say is like many times in life, and particularly in our business, when something appears to be really bad, you kind of hang in there and it can't tend to be good. And just so you know, when that merger happened, I was not a part of Trammell Crow Company, but I was a shareholder and I voted against it. Just so you know. And I was actually sitting with Tim Seneff in his office when that whole thing got announced with you guys, and he was getting some angry calls from CBRE. But that's a conversation another day, right? So, but way to go. So, but I hear you, internships and making positive situations out of negative ones. Good stuff. Michael, let's go over to you. And, you know, Michael, you had a different career path. And one of the things in your background, your finance degree at FSU and, or Lambda Chi, but you kind of went a little different than Gregg's path. And the other thing that's cool about you is you've gone from being Mr. and Sir to somebody's dad, because you've got a Seminole son these days. And so you've got a good perspective that way too. So
Correct.
Tell us a little about you, Michael.
So we've got a lot of Seminoles in the family. So between myself and my wife and my 25-year-old, we've got 3 Seminoles in the family, and one that started and he's going his own route. So we've had season tickets before I go into my other into my office and career background. You know, so I've been a Seminole since 1984. I came out of college in '88, and you say, okay, what do I want to do? And I go the accounting background. So I learned the real estate through inside, right? And you go the accounting background into the budgeting reporting background. And I've worked for Crocker and Company down in Boca Raton for almost 10.5 years. And you go the budgeting reporting due diligence, and you learn it that way. And we come across, and I grew up in the REIT world back in, and the RTC world back in the 90s. And you learn it that way, and you start growing instead of going the traditional, you know, brokerage route, you know, that way. And you learn how to go see what goes through a company. You know, you understand the REIT world. You go into, I almost became like a SEAL team reconnaissance mission guy, where we took over Coger Equities in the 90s, and they say, okay, go in and understand what goes into a property, read leases, learn how to do CAMREX, go in and understand how to do a market. So I go in and do all that. I became a CFO because I understood how to do accounting. I understood how to do forensic accounting. I almost became an entity to myself, and I would fly around the country and do this stuff. So we became Apollo Real Estate as they took over the opportunity funds in the early 90s, and Crocker, you know, merged to become a company. And in '95 they take over and they do the largest retransaction, which is kind of funny, at $519 million, and then that gets blown out of the doors these days. But it was kind of funny in the Southeast those days. And to fast forward in today's world, where I end up in Atlanta, I now work for Ares Management as a principal. So point being is you can have a different route than the traditional broker investment banking and still end up in the position I'm in. So I've touched all the different food groups, of student housing to multifamily, which I've taught myself. And that's my main aspect today, to now a workout guy inside Ares Management. So that's where it has led me today in 2020.
You know, it's funny. There's great stuff there, Michael. And I don't remind students, you know, Michael is a dad, has students at FSU and formerly at FSU. You know, feel free to ask him dad-related kind of questions, and he's going to help you out. When Mike and I were talking earlier, one of the things we talked about is how if you look at the FSU College of Business Hall of Fame, the most popular degree students have there in the Hall of Fame is accounting. Here's what's interesting is none of them work in accounting. So the background of that financial numbers drove them to success in some different areas. Mr. Trammell Crow was a CPA. So we see that often. So some of you, if you're thinking about going into brokerage or leasing, if I could wave a wand, I would be like, just do what Gregg Ickes does. Just do whatever he says to do. Gregg knows that business goal. Some of you, though, might think about going to commission-based jobs, and that's intimidating, and you don't really like that. You're more on the finance side. If that's your bag, look at what Michael has done and get Michael's advice on those areas, all right? And, you know, Michael's company and Gregg's companies are two companies that usually work together, the service side, investment side. But you can be a very strong financial person, never be a broker, and have a really cool, successful real estate career. Is that correct?
I think Gregg will tell you have to know the numbers, and if you don't know the numbers, then you're going to get sunk. But you have to understand the deals, you have to understand the numbers, you have to understand how it flows through the company and to the deal. I'm sure Gregg understands that.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
we should get into that a little later, I'm sure, John. I think that's part of it. It'd be an interesting discussion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's bring it over to Bridgid O'Connor. Hey, Bridgid, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
Good, good. So Bridgid, you actually embody a lot of what we're seeing students today. You have a degree from FSU in real estate and finance, which is super cool. And then after all that, you went back and got your MBA, graduate degree, so you're a smarty. And you went to, is it Notre Dame or Notre Dame? I don't know. But one of those two places you got an MBA, which is awesome. And the other thing is that you've had this really successful career in corporate real estate for now a Fortune 100 or Fortune 85 or 72. You're somewhere in that range, one of the biggest companies in America. And of course, you know, some students don't realize that many of the companies that they admire, think highly of, actually have big real estate departments. And that's kind of your world. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, John. So like John said, I was a finance major at FSU, and I stumbled into real estate actually as one of my electives to finance, which I'm going to assume is probably similar to a lot of the students on the phone today. And while I was at FSU, I was working for Publix in a couple of the stores in the Tallahassee area. And some of the professors, some of the guys who are on the phone with us today, would sometimes reference Publix and examples as far as, you know, Publix real estate and things like that. We've had a couple of our past leadership at Publix who were big supporters of the FSU program. And so that's what really sparked interest for me and opened my eyes to opportunities in corporate real estate. So when I graduated from FSU, I immediately I started making connections at corporate headquarters for Publix in the real estate department. And unfortunately, at that time, when I graduated, the department was only about 60 people and there was zero turnover. The real estate department is one of the best departments to work in at Publix. And when people got their foot in the door, they just didn't want to leave. So I made some connections. I kind of pinpointed how I would get my foot in the door when an opportunity or, you know, presented itself. And then I took a unique opportunity to then travel. So I did not go straight from college into the workforce, but I did take an opportunity to travel. And it was actually while I was traveling that there was a position as an analyst that was posted. And because of the connections I had made early on, Woody Rayburn reached out to me to say, hey, we have this position that has been posted. Seems like it might be a good fit for you. Unfortunately, because I was out of the country, I was not able to apply for that position, but I did keep in touch. They did move someone from the leasing team into that position. So then I was able to take advantage of the open position in the leasing department for Publix. And so from there, I've been working in Publix real estate for about 15 years. And I have held deal-making roles for about 13 of those years, most recently. And then for the past 3 years, I've stepped into a leadership role and I work on Publix's real estate strategy team, which is responsible for the real estate strategy, growth, and site selection. And so now I lead the team of real estate managers who are charged with going out and finding, great new sites for Publix. So a little unconventional, but it's been worthwhile.
Bridgid, what I heard you say is that when you're unemployed and in doubt, just travel and magically job offers will come in. That's basically what I got. No,
Exactly.
that's not what you said. What I heard you saying, first off, is get a great education, which you've done.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, what I heard your main thing was relationships. That,
Mm-hmm.
What you did was really focus on relationships and really be open to new ideas. And by being relationship focused, you opportunities came to you, but it really wasn't a mistake. It was because you were being
Mm-hmm.
pretty proactive. You were putting yourself out there, which is cool, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think what's interesting too, and again, so just for students, like when you think about Gregg's world is being a service provider. His company is getting fees working for companies that are investors in real estate. So Michael's company, they're an institutional company. They're investors. They take funds, raise money, buy properties, and hire companies like Gregg's to run the properties. Mm-hmm. When we think about Publix and what Bridgid's done her career, hers is predominantly an example of corporate real estate, in that the company she works for predominantly, when they have real estate, it's because they're using it to sell groceries. Now, Publix is a little bit of an anomaly in that they also own a ton of real estate. So they actually, by definition, are both institutional and corporate. They're doing both. But when we think about other, cool real estate, companies out there you might want to go work for, there are companies that are not in real estate investors or service providers. They are users. And so, we think about like Office Depot has a huge real estate operation down in Boca, and other companies like that are Red Lobster, who Gregg's done some business with, based in Orlando. Those are companies that have real estate for the using part on the corporate side. So very cool, very cool. So you guys got a good broad sort of areas to understand that. And if you're looking at other corporations to go work for, Bridgid can obviously answer questions for you on that. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Very cool, very cool. All right, so I want to jump into a couple of questions, and I want to talk real quick first about COVID. I don't know if you're familiar with it. But Gregg, you talked earlier about sort of making, lemons out of lemonade, opportunities. Some students might be thinking, oh my gosh, this COVID thing's terrible. Wow, I can't even find a job. Things are awful. Who would ever lease space in offices ever again, Gregg Ickes? So maybe it's all shutting down. What is your response to students who might be concerned about real estate as it relates to COVID and how it might impact their future employment?
Yeah, big question. There's a lot of areas to sort of go with that. I think to begin, I would, I sympathize with everyone in that I'm a realist, and it's a tough time to come out and find a job right now in the moment. But I often tell people, hopefully our lives are marathons and not sprints. And so just like you heard from Bridgid, she had an opportunity to go travel, or maybe someone can go, get a graduate degree, or let's go figure out how to find an opportunity. And so when you think about this time, the cream will rise to the top. Differentiating kind of yourself, whether you're a business or whether you're a student, is critical. And that means you can't just do the basics. You've got to really figure out how to go above and beyond. And we could get into a few thoughts on that. I know John's got an entire book on that. And so when COVID struck, maybe just from my seat, our vantage point, we've sort of described it as a lightning strike type of event, which outside of maybe September 11th, in modern day times, the U.S. has never really lived through. And I would argue from an economic standpoint, it was the first time that the entire country, not for like a few days or a week, but like hit the pause button for a while. And some industries are still struggling their way back. So that's the landscape. That's the reality in which we're operating. With regards to, is there opportunity? I am an optimist. So the reality is when the market is super hot, and our industry, at times it can be hard to find new opportunities because everything's leased up, everything's going pretty well. Our clients probably aren't apt to make changes because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But when you are in a time like this, performance really matters. Relationships matter, and you'll hear me today talk a lot about relationships. Those things matter. And honestly, if you looked at it at the surface, and yeah, Foundry's, you know, I'm biased, kind of a cool company, started with 12 or 350 today. That may sound like a lot. I think CB has like 90,000 associates globally. So you may ask yourself, why would an institutional client work with Foundry when they can go work with CB that has 90,000 people and every resource in the world? And I would argue those things. I would say, I think we can be a little more agile. I think we can be creative. I think we have built strong, authentic relationships. And then what we've strategically done, and thank goodness we did, connecting to Michael's earlier point, years back, we started investing heavily to have a true institutional accounting and reporting department. Not the sexiest part of real estate to talk about, brokerage development, all those things are cool and fun. But what we have found is if we have good relationships, we're creative, we're agile, and then we can deliver kind of that institutional quality accounting and reporting, there's a lot of opportunity out there to go win business. And if you take that to where you're at today, you know, think about the things you can control. Think about your attitude, think about your activities, think about, can I just do one or two small little things extra? And maybe, like Bridgid, maybe someone calls you in 6 or 12 months later when there is an opportunity because you did something creative. And an example I give to FSU students, and it is super simple, but you probably will come into contact with some people at conferences or events, and they'll say, hey, my son or daughter's about to start there. I haven't been to the campus in forever. And why not send them a follow-up thank you note, but why not grab a campus map and print out a report and say, here's my favorite barbecue joint. If, you know, when your son's allowed to have a beer, here's my favorite place to grab a beer. Here's where we like to go before a football game. You got to walk down Landis Green and look at this statue, whatever it is. If I get that, if I get something like that from you, I remember that. If I get a handwritten note or an email, that's the right thing to do, but you maybe haven't differentiated yourself. So I think through those things right now. They're more important than ever. And while it's a rocky, turbulent economy, great companies and great careers typically get started those. And I don't know the exact ages or times, but when I hear John and Michael and Bridgid today, I think all of us either started in a really bad downturn or right around when we started, the economy smashed into a really bad downturn. And it doesn't feel great, but it actually is, I think, looking back, a very good time to get started in the real estate business. But it can be hard to get that first opportunity.
Gotcha. Thanks, Greg. You know, Greg, one of the things I've been talking about is that imagine if we'd all been born in the year 1900, right? And so at age 14, the Great War starts, and how terrible it is. And then, you know, 1918, the war is over, but then the Spanish flu rises up, which is way worse than anything we're dealing with. And so then what did 1920 look like, right? And the answer is the roaring 20s. Like economically, that was a huge boom that was defined by parties and innovation, things like that. And I think that's really to your point. Like, you know, when it's negative, like right now, people might think it's going to keep going forever. Well, you know what? People are going to lease office space. They're going to go to restaurants. It's gonna come back. And so what I hear you saying that, and also it's interesting. I love it when you talked about, you know, why would somebody pick Foundry, you know, with a CBRE? And the answer is that relationships is a key part of it. You've talked on that. Creativity and positivity, and then really sharp skills, right? Like, you know, you could have all the relationships in the world, but if you don't have the back office, and you're talking about that corporately, but you also mean that individually, correct? Yeah. Right? Like, you've got to be able to get the talent, and then doing things that are beyond. Your example there was fantastic, right? And so I always sort of think about relationships gets kind of thrown out there. Like people throw out that word and then maybe it becomes like aloha, like what does that even mean? Like, so when I hear you saying relationship, what I hear you saying is that you're really trying to make sure that you're doing above and beyond, like you're thinking ahead, and like, you know, you would help a competitor, you would help, you know, somebody that's not even directly part of your business, but it's part of being a person that's relationship human focused. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. And I, you know, I just head back to, it's amazing. Hopefully it's not depressing, but you do blink and, you know, you're in your 30s, 40s, into 50s. It happens quick. But when I start to look back on my career now, you know, John, I worked with John in the late 90s at the same company, and 22 years later, we're on a panel here together, and he's moderating. So it's a small world in the real estate business. So be wise to that. And, and I just encourage people, it's hard at times, but listen. And if you hear something unique or something referenced, then follow up on that topic as opposed to, hey, here's my resume, and if there's a job, let me know.
So John, to piggyback off of Gregg, so we built the company with Apollo Real Estate, Drew Cunningham and I. Gregg, you might have know that name. So Drew and I, the biggest thing about standing out is we built a great back of the house with reporting, right? So that's something that stands out in my mind during times like this. You need something easy when the banks are really zoning in on stuff that they need now, and you don't want to reinvent the wheel. So when you go to the bigger companies like CBRE or other big companies that sometimes can't pump it out like that, you want to go to the boutique companies. So that is something that's near and dear to my heart, because I have built something like that where you want to get a property management company where you get asset management reports out for the same percentage price. So that's really, to your point, sticking out or differentiating yourself to this whole group here, to the 96 people that we have out here. Differentiate yourselves business-wise, picking up, so we can't say that enough.
Let's tell one more Gregg Ickes story, okay? So when Gregg and I and everybody on this call, we were on a call on Tuesday, and I said I had to jump off the call because I had, just take it, it's fine. It's a good story. So I told them I had to jump off the call because I was having lunch with the dean of the FAMU College of Law, and Gregg, Bridgid, Michael know I do a lot of civil rights work. So when we started this call, what did Gregg say to me as we were warming up? He said, "How was your meeting with the FAMU College of Law?" Now think about that. Gregg's not involved with that. He has no connection. The reason why he's saying that is because he listened and he followed up, and just as a human being, like asking interest in something that's important to me. That's very kind. It's affirming. It's like, that's relationship building, right? That's what that looks like. So, it's the same thing with Bridgid. When Bridgid was talking about listening, right? Listening to people and then leaning in, right? And let's not be lost with Bridgid that, she was working at Publix at the time. Somebody might, think about, hey, so yeah, Bridgid started like as a cashier and now she's a senior executive. Like, don't let that be lost on you, right? So she had the humility and hard work to do a job that was entry level and then really kept those relationships going. She just didn't leave Publix behind. With that in mind, Bridgid, let's go back over to you, because my question I wanted to ask you is that, you have navigated a career at a major corporation, right? And that is not easy. That's not an easy thing to do, to start out being a, young newbie with people that have been there forever and then work that system. Do you have any advice for college students and when they get involved with a big corporation of how to be successful?
Absolutely. I would say it starts with getting your foot in the door, and especially just putting it into the context of the times we're living in right now, where opportunities might not be bountiful, but they are out there. Like Gregg was saying, you really need to differentiate yourself and stand out. So, the basics that any of your professors or your parents would remind you of: make sure your resume is up to date and that there are no mistakes. And then really capitalize on the relationships that you've made through this program, throughout, your time at FSU, past conferences, internships, things like that. Because, even if you're not applying for a job at Publix, but you're applying for a job with Gregg's group, and you can say, I've talked to Bridgid, I know Bridgid, then Gregg will call me and say, hey, someone dropped your name. Can you tell me about this person? And then you can have someone who can, vouch for you and say, yeah, so-and-so interned for us last summer. They did a really great job. I would certainly consider them for this position. Or even one better, you start to develop those relationships, and, you could ask me to make a call on your behalf and just say, hey, Gregg, I understand so-and-so applied for this job. I would recommend that you find that resume in the big stack. And, it really rises to the top. In a time like this too, it's so weird with a lot of us working from home and working remotely and things like that. So we're not interviewing like, we would like to. There's not as many in-person interviews and things like that. So, you know, it's all about making sure, like I said, you know, differentiating yourselves, making relationships, because it's harder for us to find the right person, the right fit, because our interactions are different right now. So if I can look to Mike or John or Gregg, or even, you know, the professors at FSU, and just, you know, get a reference on, you know, someone who's applying, that really goes a long way to help you all out. And then just as far as, you know, navigating once you get your foot in the door, I would certainly say, you know, take a position to get your foot in the door. It might not be your dream job, but once you get in, you can understand the lay of the land, and you can really start to develop a strategy so that you could get from where you start to your end goal. You can start learning the business, you can start learning the players, and then really importantly, you can start networking as well, because, you know, like everyone has already mentioned, it is such a small world in real estate, and those relationships are important. And so, you know, it goes a long way too, even if you're working in-house for Publix, that, you know, if someone from Gregg's team says, you know, I really enjoyed working with Bridgid on that project, she's awesome. You know, it really helps a lot to get those compliments from outside of the organization, and, you know, have the leadership within your company really recognize the value that you bring to the team.
That's great insight, Bridgid. You know, on top of that, Bridgid, do you ever, like, if you were, if you had a position available and a kid gets your name and you looked at them, and then you might look at their LinkedIn, I would imagine that if they're connected to Gregg and Michael and myself, that'd be a big deal, you know, right? And so even if they're connected to Dean Gatzloff or Professor Bailey, you know, that those connections help, because our industry is pretty small. So any degree of connectivity is something that they can make happen. That would be helpful. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
That's cool. That's cool. We're going to run a short time. We got a little extra time here for talking, but one thing, I just put this in the chat box, and I'll say this. If I was a student right now, I would take a picture of this Zoom call, and I would post on LinkedIn, and I would tag all these people, and I would say Publix Supermarkets is the greatest corporation ever, and Gregg Ickes is Superman, and Michael is like the smartest guy in the room. And then I would tag FSU, and I would put that out there. Now, I say things like that, and here's the reality is, it's like, if two of you do it, it would be a miracle, you know? So Gregg's saying, like, hey, send a handwritten note's good. And I would say to all 96 of you, send 96 handwritten notes to Bridgid. And I mean that. But the reality is that, you know, probably 4 will do it. And so when Gregg says that story about, you know, sending that the map or whatever, man, it's a genius idea. Sometimes students don't do that because they think everyone's going to do it. Man, most people don't do it. You would be shocked at how little you have to do to make yourself stand out. And so those little efforts are a big deal. Is that right, Bridgid?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
Michael, I want to talk to you real quick about opportunities. So with this sort of uncertainty into the market, and so if a student is thinking, gosh, you know, like the industry is changing, is there an area that you see more opportunities than another that maybe they should be thinking about?
I would, you know, and this is part of my going, I would probably make sure you have your modeling skills and Excel skills down. Okay, you want to make sure it's really, really important. I'm gonna go off cue for a second here. So, you know, we at this point we are still hiring. We are raising at this point. We raised about $1.3 million in our opportunistic fund for development, repurposing of buildings, for analyst positions. So, you know, there are definitely companies that are hiring. You know, we, like Gregg said, you know, we are optimistic of what's happening out there. We're probably in the industrial area, the student housing market, depending on what's happening out there, because we see a lot of what could happen in once these forbearance agreements, you know, go to the wayside, and see what's going on. So I think you're going to see opportunities down in the multifamily area. I'm not so sure about retail. Our good friend Mitch, I was making fun of him last night, John, on that. So in terms of Amazon packages coming to my house. So, you know, I would be careful in what you see. I think the brokerage community is still hiring, you know, in and out here. So there are still opportunities, but again, we come back to the common theme of differentiating yourself, but make sure, I was talking to somebody in my company before, you know, in terms of the modeling and your Excel skills, and maybe through the accounting world. Start your position, right? I think Bridgid makes an excellent point. Start somewhere, okay? You've got to just get started. They are out there. People are reshuffling the deck. They are looking for entry-level stuff. I mean, they are definitely out there. So just stay on top of stuff. Don't think there aren't anything. There are stuff that is out there. So I do have my own kids that are looking, but you have to stay on top of stuff to make sure you're looking.
Gotcha. So Michael, are you hiring? Your company's hiring now?
We just hired across the country on analyst positions.
Gotcha. Bridgid, is Publix real estate hiring? Will you guys be hiring in 2021, you think?
Yes, absolutely. We've hired several people throughout the pandemic. I was actually in interviews all day yesterday hiring for our team. So there are opportunities at Publix. I would recommend, if that's of interest, just do publix.jobs, and our jobs website will come up. You can actually set alerts. So keywords like real estate, things like that. If a job comes open, you'll get an email so that you can see that. And I would just recommend have your resume and your cover letter ready, because quite often we get so inundated with resumes that the postings don't stay open very long. So I wouldn't wait on that if you're interested.
Gotcha. So resume, cover letter ready. And Piper, if you get a chance, would you mind putting that in the chat box, what your reference as far as Publix jobs? Could you do that, please? Just so the students can see that. And then, thank you. And then Gregg, are you guys hiring all? Anything happen over there in Foundry that's interesting?
Yeah, we probably similar. We have made some hires. We're definitely much more selective, and literally every hire, no matter who it is going through the executive team to make sure that, we need to make the hire in this season. But being a fairly, kind of diverse platform of what we do, we have and we will continue to make some hires. We've made a couple of junior brokerage hires, more on our industrial teams, because as you're probably hearing, and reading, industrial is really strong right now and probably will be for a while. We've hired some accounting people because we picked up a bunch of property management business. We actually hired a superstar student. You may know him, John, Wesley Nunnery, that came out of UCF's real estate program into a kind of an entry-level real estate property management role. And again, he's just a really strong candidate, and we had a need. So we have been doing that. I think we will more. There's probably some areas, where we won't be quite as aggressive on hiring. But I do think, all things considered, we'll make some hires in 2021.
Gregg, I think that's great. I personally only hire FSU grads, but if you want to study at a sporting university, that's super good for you. No, that's awesome. I actually just saw on LinkedIn you guys are hiring in Atlanta for industrial, so I saw it out there. So that's good stuff. And let me ask you this, Gregg, like if a student is looking to get out there, wanting to get brokerage, but they're still trying to figure it out, could they email you and say, hey, Gregg, like here's my resume, here's my approach? Could they email and ask you? Is that okay?
Yeah, they could. And my encouragement to them always, and I think back to just little differentiators, it's amazing that this World Wide Web thing's been around, since the early mid 90s. And a lot of students reach out to me over the years, and they've done like zero research on our company, on my background, on our leadership, on what we do. And it's usually just, hey, are you hiring? And, I want to be a broker or a developer or an analyst. So my encouragement would be, go do a little research, maybe think about some of the things that you want to do. And I do think that approach is much more effective. And I don't want to sound intimidating and saying, don't send me a generic email, but I would just ask that I think it's more productive if there's a little bit of research and a little bit of background. And a lot of students reach out and they don't provide me their bio or resume, but they're looking for an opportunity, which always is a little surprising to me too. So I would always include that as part of a reference.
I just hear that you're a very mean person, right?
I know.
No, you're not. That's not mean. You're being helpful. And those are all great comments, Gregg. I would tell students that on my website, I have my guide to commercial real estate, and it's free. It's on there. And I would tell students to read that, right? Gregg is so on point. Like, you don't want to be lazy about it. Like, hey, Gregg, what's up? I need a job. That's not it. what you do is research Gregg, research his company, his background, and make your questions even better, right? And so, like, let's say it differently. Gregg, if he said, somebody emailed you and said, hey, I've got a job interview in Chicago with CBRE, and the person I'm interviewing with, it appears worked at Trammell Crow Company with you in 2003. Like, that's an email you go, wow, that's an impressive student. Same kind of thing, but what you're saying is they've done that deep dive that shows they put, you know, if somebody's asking you a question, it's not that you're just answering an email right then. You're answering it based on all of your memories and your history. They're asking for years of your advice. So what you're saying is you want to see a student that's made an investment of their time first, so that you're in a peer relationship. Otherwise, it's just basically asking you for charity, right?
Yeah, and I don't think any of the things that Michael or Bridgid or you or I are asking for are very difficult to do. They take 5 to 15 minutes, and but again, your point earlier, I sort of teach my own kids that that there is just a reality that there's a lot of people in the world that just don't make that extra effort. So as turbulent as the times are, as scary as the kind of business world can be, I have a little bit of peace around it, because if you do those small little things and you're a little bit more prepared than your peer, if you do that consistently, like, your career path will take care of itself.
Be prepared, absolutely.
Gregg, my 17-year-old daughter came to me the other day. She's at Winter Park High School, and she said, Dad, there's a Democrat club, but there's no Republican club in our high school. And I said, maybe you should found it, you know, like Foundry, found it. And she did. And so now there's going to be a Republican club at Winter Park High School. But that's another step, like it's leadership. I need to go over to see if we have questions from the students. If we have a little extra time, Piper, the question, and my last question for Bridgid and Gregg and Michael would be, is that do they have any other advice for 21-year-olds and students? So be thinking about that if we have time to get that. But Piper, are there any questions from the students we want to touch on?
Right now in the chat, we don't have anything. Any student, if you have a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself, ask a question. Oh, and we just got one. If someone were to transition from a finance position to a broker position, can you describe how their day-to-day workload would change? And also what would stay the same?
Gregg, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah. To Michael's point earlier, I think the real estate, the commercial real estate industry over our careers has become so much more specialized. And the reality is the level of just basic, you know, finance and acumen you need to have is critical to be successful in any position, as well as a brokerage position. So, you know, a little bit of a broad brush here, because a finance position can mean a lot of things. But if I had to take a shot at it, I would say oftentimes in a finance role, you may spend more time kind of behind a computer screen in an office, grinding in Excel or Argus or some other software doing analysis. If you transition over to a brokerage position, you are still going to do elements of that because you're probably going to need to report to your client and provide thoughtful advice from a financial standpoint. But you likely will also add in some other elements like making some cold calls, whether it's on the phone or in person, doing some additional research on companies that are growing or buildings that may be, you know, opportunities to pick up, to sell, or to lease. Probably a little bit more on the external relationship building, whereas oftentimes internal finance positions can be a little bit more internal. But again, that's a broad brush, and that doesn't mean that they're all that way. But that's my shot at answering that question.
Good. Other student questions, Piper?
Again, we don't have any at this time. Oh, here comes another one. What would you recommend for someone at FSU who's looking for a career in another state, such as Colorado was the example given?
I can answer that if you guys want to jump in on that as well. So if you're looking to join, if you're looking at going to real estate in another state, here's the following things I would do. I would join trade associations. I tell all students to join ULI, ICSC, and NAIOP, and I would join them in the geographic region you're looking to move to. So let's just say Denver. Like if you got involved joining now Denver NAIOP, you would be able to see who all the players are in real estate in Denver. You could do the same thing with ULI. ICSC doesn't have as many local stuff, but you make that connectivity. I would subscribe to the Denver Business Journal. So you're getting their information, you're reading about it, you're studying it. I would super study FSU Alumni Association and see who from our Alumni Association is in Denver or in Colorado. And I would start reaching out to them. So whatever geographic region you're thinking about, man, build up that database of contacts. You know, again, going back to Gregg's point, if you know you want to be in office leasing in Denver, if you were to email Gregg and Michael and Bridgid separately and say, you know, I know your company, I know Publix is not in Denver, but I'm looking to get an office leasing out there. Do you have recommendations on contacts in Colorado or whichever one you are? Being that specific very, very much helps. The other thing to look at is look at our real estate executive board. And by the way, all of you should be connected to our real estate executive board members and our real estate committee on LinkedIn. All of you should be. But study that list. Maybe one of those people on that list has a Denver office. So we've been talking a little bit about CBRE. Well, if we have CBRE board member, reach out to them, ask them about their Denver office or any company that has a location out there. You want to go to another question, Piper?
Yeah, our next question is, what are a few things you see first-year analysts struggle with the most coming out of college?
John, I'll go ahead and take that. I saw it come in. So I give everybody for the last umpteen years the speed kills speech, right? So I think you need to get some first-year analysts and even second-year analysts, you need to slow down in what you do, right? And ask questions, okay? It's a marathon, not a sprint, as Gregg said before. We give that all the time. So slow down, ask questions. Don't spin your wheels, but spend time trying to work it out yourself and ask questions because everybody's door is always open, right? So you got to make sure you ask the question and you're listening. I think we were talking about this in the last half an hour as well. So, but don't rush to go get something done because someone's expecting it. Yes, they are expecting it, but you want to get it right the first time instead of spending 5 hours to go fix it, especially on a model. So make sure you're spending time. And one of my other pet peeves, and I'm sure Bridgid and Gregg and John, is take notes when somebody is bringing a notebook, okay? So when you go in there and you're like, aren't you listening to what I'm saying and taking notes? It drives me crazy when someone walks in and they don't have a notebook in their hand.
Michael, that's so awesome. I've been taking notes this whole call. You know, like I always do that. And if you're a student and you're so lost in what the person's saying, just write out your grocery list. I mean, at a minimum, it shows respect, but you forget stuff. Man, that is a great point.
I write everything down still to this day because that's how I just take it.
Helps you process it. It's good. It's good.
And John, I'll add one thing there. I have a buddy that I agree with all that advice. He describes sometimes they can be notebooks to nowhere. And when I often see younger, they take notes, but they don't really go do anything with it or it just sort of goes in the notebook. And so my encouragement also would be, you know, whether it's OneNote or some other software, don't tell me you're too busy because there's a lot of hours in the day. Find a pocket in your day and translate some of those notes to where you're not going to lose them. And you'd be surprised. Michael probably goes back and reference things from a year or two ago when he went and visited a market and sat with, you know, someone.
All the time. Great point.
And so I do think that's critical. And the tangible connection to the asset. I see a lot of really smart young analysts, but they struggle to connect the model to the reality of the asset. And every asset sort of has its own story and personality. Mm-hmm. And I think Michael and Bridgid would agree, the great analysts figure out early on how to do the numbers well, but then also step back and go, now, does this all make sense with where this asset is, what it is, the surrounding factors, et cetera? The great ones figure that out early in their career.
So part of and this will probably get into the last thing, is make sure everybody wants to go into investment sales. And I'm sure Gregg and Bridgid will agree with this, but make sure that it's not just numbers on a page, okay? You must get out from behind your desk and make sure that you touch and see and feel and smell the real estate and kick the tires around. So even though I came up from the accounting background and learned due diligence, and I've gone through all these recessions, I've made myself a valuable commodity because I read leases and did all the little things, and that's how I learned real estate. So when they said, hey, we can't lay you off way back in the day because we need you to go understand and go read the real estate and go do the forensic accounting and do all that because you actually rolled up your sleeves and went to work. So very important that you understand what the numbers are on the page instead of running that. So you can be like, okay, so with all real estate's the same, they all have just different quirks, but they're all the same from the 50,000 foot level, whether you're touching student housing, industrial, office, multifamily, they just have different quirks if you look at it simply.
You know, one of the things when you're taking, back to the taking notes thing, if you were to email Michael and say, Michael, I really enjoyed what you said on the presentation today. Here's what I heard you say. Here's what I took away. That's a unique thing, right? If you were to send that to Bridgid, you know, that might be something Bridgid might use as she's doing these interviews. So there's resources you can create by just listening and taking notes and then putting those back out. Piper, let's do this because I know we need to wrap up. Bridgid, do you have any final comments that you want to make as far as advice to our students?
Yes, thank you. So just to kind of close the loop on what we were just talking about, I would reiterate what Michael was just saying and put it this way. I always tell my folks, make sure you understand the why behind whatever it is you're doing, whether it's crunching numbers, negotiating a deal, whatever the case may be. But if you don't understand the why and you're just doing it because it's the way the company has always done it or whatever the case may be, it just doesn't make you as effective. So I would just make sure, don't feel silly to ask questions if it doesn't really make sense to you right out of the gates. I would also say too, one of the candidates who we talked to, I thought was really impressive because not only did she do her research on Publix and on the position, but she also went out on LinkedIn and found some of our associates who currently hold that position. And she reached out and connected with them. And some of them took her phone call and gave her advice. So
Wow.
When she walked into the interview, she knew exactly who she was meeting with. She knew, you know, everything about us, where we went to school, what our hobbies were and things like that. So just right out of the gates, it was very personable and conversational and all of that. So I thought that was a really good move on her part. And then I would also say too, I mean, you know, I'm sitting here with a couple of guys from the big cities, and especially in a time like now, I wouldn't shy away from opportunities in smaller towns. Publix headquarters is in Lakeland, Florida. It's strategically located between Tampa and Orlando, so it's not a bad place to be, but it doesn't sound as sexy as living in Tampa or Orlando. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to get your foot in the door with a company, especially if it's a company hiring, and not get too hung up on trying to end up where you want to be, for example, in a bigger city. But take those opportunities, you know, get your foot in the door, learn the job, gain the experience, so then you can make yourselves more valuable to make a move in the future. And then, of course, I know there were more questions we didn't get to, so I would just encourage everyone to feel free to reach out to us individually via email, and we can make sure we get answers to all of your questions.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what everyone said. I encourage you guys to follow up. There's a lot of great questions that are left in the chat. So follow up with those questions and have those conversations. Everyone on the panel is very willing to talk to you. And I want to thank each of our guests for their time and the great discussion. I really enjoyed being able to listen to you guys today. So thank you for joining us. To all of our attendees, thank you. Thank you for moderating the chat and being respectful there. Please join us on Thursday, September 24th at noon for our next of our 21 discussion. This will feature Armando Cardina, who is the founder and executive chair of Cardina Partners, headquartered in Miami. Cardina Partners is one of South Florida's premier property development and investment companies. You are not going to want to miss out on this. It'll be really interesting and really great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and do your follow-ups.